A Hebrew slave stands before the most powerful ruler on earth. Chains still mark his wrists. Prison dirt still clings to his robe. 24 hours ago, he was forgotten in a dungeon. Now, Pharaoh removes his own signet ring and places it on the slave's finger. The transformation isn't gradual. It isn't earned through years of political maneuvering. It happens in a single conversation, in a single night, and it will save millions of lives. But to understand this impossible ascent, we must go back 13 years to the moment everything fell apart. This extraordinary account is recorded in Genesis chapters 37 through 41, a narrative that spans continents, cultures, and the depths of human suffering, before erupting into one of history's most dramatic reversals of fortune. In the next minutes, you'll witness betrayal by blood, false accusations by the powerful, abandonment in darkness, and ultimately an elevation so swift and complete that it defies every rule of ancient hierarchy. The sun rises over Hebron, painting the hills of Canaan in shades of amber and gold. The air carries the scent of olive trees and morning dew. In the valley below, flocks move like living clouds across the landscape, their bleating a constant symphony of pastoral life. This is the world of the patriarchs, where family wealth is measured in livestock, where tents are homes, and where a father's blessing carries more weight than any crown. In the largest tent, a boy of 17 examines a gift that will seal his fate. The robe shimmers in the early light, its fabric woven with colors so vibrant they seem to pulse with life. Rich crimson threads intertwine with royal blues and purples, colors reserved for nobility, colors that cost more than a common man earns in years. Joseph runs his fingers across the garment, feeling the weight of his father's favoritism woven into every thread. He doesn't yet understand that this beautiful thing is also a target, that every eye watching him wear it burns with resentment. Outside, 10 men watch through the tent opening. Brothers, same blood, different mothers, different destinies. Their robes are simple wool, practical and plain, stained with the honest dirt of labor. Their hands are calloused from staff and stone, their faces are weathered from sun and wind, and their hearts are poisoned with a jealousy so deep it has transformed love into something unrecognizable. Reuben, the eldest, shifts his weight and looks away. His jaw tightens. Simeon and Levi exchange glances that need no words. Judah spits in the dust. Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher, Issachar and Zebulun, each carries the same burden, the same burning question. Why him? What makes Joseph so special that their father Jacob pours out affection like oil, while they receive only distant acknowledgement for their labor? But the robe is only the beginning. Joseph has something else. Something invisible but more provocative than any garment. He has dreams, and he cannot keep them to himself. "Listen to this dream I had," Joseph announces one morning, his voice bright with wonder, innocent of the storm he's about to unleash. "We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Genesis 37:7 records these words that fall like sparks on dry tinder. The silence that follows is dense, suffocating. Then Simeon's voice cuts through it like a blade. "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" The question drips with venom. From that moment, Genesis 37:8 tells us they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. But Joseph, still wrapped in youth's oblivious confidence, shares another dream. "Listen, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Even Jacob, his doting father, rebukes him for this one. "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" Yet Genesis 37:11 reveals a telling detail. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Weeks pass. The brothers drive the flocks north to Dothan, seeking pasture. The distance from home breeds a dangerous freedom, a sense that what happens far from their father's tent might stay hidden in the wilderness. When Jacob sends Joseph to check on them, wearing that cursed coat of many colors, he sends his beloved son into a trap he cannot imagine. They see him coming from far off. The coat catches sunlight like a banner, announcing his approach across the hills. And in that moment of recognition, murder enters the conversation as casually as discussing the weather. "Here comes that dreamer," they say to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Genesis 37:19-20 preserves their chilling conspiracy. Only Reuben's intervention prevents immediate bloodshed. "Let's not take his life," he suggests, planning secretly to rescue Joseph later. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." They agree, and when Joseph arrives, breathless and smiling, they attack. Hands that should protect seize and tear. Brothers who should defend strip away the magnificent robe. Joseph's confusion turns to terror as they drag him toward the pit. He shouts, he pleads, he calls their names, invoking childhood memories, their father's face, their mother's love. But their hearts have transformed into stone, and they throw him into darkness. The cistern is empty of water but full of horror. The walls are slick limestone, impossible to climb. The opening above becomes a circle of sky that might as well be a painting for all the hope it offers. Joseph's voice echoes off the walls as he screams for mercy. But above ground, his brothers sit down to eat their meal, the casual cruelty of it more chilling than the act itself. Genesis 37:25 captures this stomach-turning detail. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Judah sees opportunity in the approaching merchants. "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." Genesis 37:26-27 records this moment, where murder transforms into merchandise, where a brother's life is valued at 20 shekels of silver. They haul Joseph up from the pit. For one delirious moment, he must think, rescue has come. Then he sees the traders, the ropes, the calculating eyes assessing his value. The ropes bite into his wrists. The journey to Egypt begins. And with every step southward, Joseph moves further from everything he knows, from his language, his God, his identity, his future. The brothers slaughter a goat and dip Joseph's robe in its blood. They bring it to Jacob, and the old man's anguish tears through the camp like a physical force. "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Genesis 37:33 records Jacob's devastating conclusion. The father enters a grief so profound that Genesis 37:35 tells us he refused to be comforted. He doesn't know his son lives, walking in chains toward a destiny that will reshape nations. Egypt rises from the desert like a fever dream. Massive stone structures that make the hills of Canaan look like anthills. The Nile, wider than any river Joseph has imagined, flowing with the lifeblood of civilization. Cities where thousands live pressed together, their noise and smell and chaos overwhelming to a boy from the quiet pastures. Temples with pillars that reach toward heaven, covered in strange writings and stranger images, gods with animal heads, priests with shaved bodies, a world so foreign that Joseph must feel he's fallen off the edge of the earth. The slave market strips away the last shreds of dignity. Hands prod him like livestock. Questions in a harsh language he's beginning to understand assess his strength, his health, his potential value. Then a man approaches, whose bearing speaks of authority, whose eyes miss nothing. Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard, sees something in this Hebrew teenager. Perhaps intelligence in the eyes, perhaps strength in the bearing despite the chains, perhaps simply a good investment. He pays the price and Joseph becomes property, a thing owned, a tool to be used. But here in the depths of degradation, something unexpected happens. Genesis 39:2 declares, "The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master." That presence, that invisible advantage, begins to manifest in practical ways. Joseph learns Egyptian faster than should be possible. He understands the household management intuitively. He organizes, improves, streamlines. Within months, Potiphar notices. Within a year, Potiphar trusts him with increasingly important responsibilities. Genesis 39:4 tells us, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. The slave becomes the manager, the Hebrew boy becomes indispensable, and Potiphar's household flourishes under Joseph's administration to such a degree that Genesis 39:5 records, "The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field." For a moment, stability. For a season, success. Joseph might allow himself to imagine this could last, that he's found a place in this foreign land, that the worst is behind him. He doesn't yet understand that every elevation prepares him for a deeper fall, that God is forging him in fires of increasing intensity. Potiphar's wife watches Joseph move through the house. She sees his youth, his strength, the way his foreign features catch the eye. Her desire grows from curiosity to obsession, and one day when the house is empty, she makes her intentions clear with words that leave no ambiguity. "Come to bed with me." Genesis 39:7 records this blunt proposition. Joseph's refusal is immediate and absolute. "With me in charge, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Genesis 39:8-9 captures his moral clarity, his loyalty to both earthly master and heavenly Lord. But virtue is no shield against vengeance. Day after day she pursues. Day after day he refuses, until the day she catches his cloak as he flees, and fury at rejection transforms into a weapon more deadly than any sword. When Potiphar returns, she spins a tale of assault, of the Hebrew slave attacking her, of her screams driving him away, but not before she secured evidence, his cloak left behind in his escape. Potiphar's rage erupts. There is no trial, no investigation, no chance for Joseph to defend himself. Why would an Egyptian nobleman believe a slave's word against his wife's? Genesis 39:20 records the brutal simplicity. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. The prison is called the Round House, a fortress of stone and despair where political prisoners and royal offenders disappear. Many enter, few leave. The darkness here is different from the cistern in Dothan, more permanent, more hopeless. Joseph has now lost everything twice. First his family, then his hard-won position. First betrayed by brothers, now by a lie. First sold for silver, now condemned for virtue. The injustice is so complete, so overwhelming that lesser men would shatter under its weight. But Genesis 39:21 introduces a phrase that becomes Joseph's lifeline. The Lord was with him, not delivering him from prison, not reversing the injustice, simply present, working through circumstances that seem designed to destroy. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. The pattern repeats. The fall leads to unexpected rise. The administrator of Potiphar's house becomes the administrator of the prison. Genesis 39:22-23 tells us, "The warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there." The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Years pass, not months, years. The immediacy of crisis fades into the grinding endurance of time. Joseph is now in his mid-20s, and more than a decade has passed since his brothers threw him into that pit. The dreams of youth, those visions of sheaves and stars bowing down, must seem like cruel mockeries. Where is the fulfillment? Where is the justice? Where is the God who gave those dreams? Then Pharaoh's personal cupbearer and baker commit offenses that land them in Joseph's prison. These are not common criminals. These are men with access to royalty, with connections to power, with knowledge of the palace. And one night, they both have troubling dreams that leave them distraught. Joseph notices their distress. Even in prison, he maintains the compassion that sets him apart. "Why do you look so sad today?" he asks. They explain their predicament, disturbing dreams, and no interpreter to reveal their meaning. And Joseph, speaking words that reveal where his confidence truly lies, responds, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Genesis 40:8 preserves this moment where Joseph's gift begins to manifest again after years of dormancy. The cupbearer speaks first. In his dream, a vine with 3 branches bloomed and produced grapes. He squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph listens, and understanding comes not from calculation, but from something deeper, something beyond natural wisdom. "This is what it means," Joseph says. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer." Genesis 40:12-13 records this precise interpretation. Then Joseph makes a request that reveals the depth of his desperation. "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." Genesis 40:14-15 captures this plea, this hope that human remembrance might secure what justice has denied. The baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation, shares his dream. 3 baskets of bread on his head, birds eating from the top basket. Joseph's face must darken as understanding comes, because this interpretation brings no hope. This is what it means. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Genesis 40:18-19 records these terrible words. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, both interpretations come to pass with exact precision. The cupbearer is restored to his position. The baker is executed. Joseph waits, watching the prison entrance, expecting the cupbearer to remember his promise, to speak his name in the palace, to secure his release. But Genesis 40:23 delivers a devastating conclusion. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph, he forgot him. 2 more years pass, 2 years of hope deferred, of waiting for a rescue that doesn't come, of wondering if God has forgotten him, along with the cupbearer. Joseph is now 30 years old. 13 years have passed since that day in Dothan. 13 years of slavery and false accusation and imprisonment. 13 years of preparation that he cannot see. Of forging that feels only like breaking, of a destiny being shaped in darkness. Then one morning the palace erupts into chaos. Pharaoh has dreamed, and the dreams have shaken him to his core. In the first dream, he stood by the Nile as 7 healthy fat cows came up from the river to graze. Then 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up and devoured the fat cows. In the second dream, 7 healthy heads of grain grew on a single stalk. Then 7 thin, scorched heads of grain swallowed them up. Pharaoh wakes in distress, summons every magician and wise man in Egypt, but none can interpret the dreams in a way that satisfies him. Then, finally, memory stirs in the cupbearer's mind. "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings," he tells Pharaoh. "Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream, and things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us." Genesis 41:9-13 records this testimony that finally brings Joseph's name to royal attention. Pharaoh sends for Joseph immediately. Guards rush to the prison. Keys turn in locks that haven't opened for Joseph in years. But even in the urgency of royal summons, Joseph takes time to shave and change his clothes. He will not appear before Pharaoh looking like what he's been, a forgotten prisoner. He will appear as what he is, a man who carries dignity regardless of circumstance. The throne room is overwhelming, massive pillars carved with hieroglyphs, gold gleaming on every surface. The throne itself rises like a mountain, and on it sits the man considered a living god, the absolute ruler of the known world's most powerful nation. Courtiers and officials line the walls. Every eye watches the Hebrew slave brought from the dungeon. The air is electric with curiosity and skepticism. What can this foreigner possibly offer that Egypt's finest minds have failed to provide? Pharaoh wastes no time with pleasantries. "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." The statement is both test and challenge. And Joseph's response reveals everything about what 13 years of suffering have forged in him. He doesn't claim personal power. He doesn't seize the moment for self-promotion. Instead, Genesis 41:16 records words of profound humility. "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Pharaoh recounts his dreams, the cows, the grain, the consuming of plenty by scarcity. And as he speaks, Joseph listens with an intensity that goes beyond hearing. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't rush to interpret. He waits until Pharaoh finishes, until the full picture is clear. Then he speaks with absolute certainty, not from his own wisdom, but from the revelation flooding his mind. The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Genesis 41:25 begins Joseph's interpretation. He explains the 7 good cows and 7 good heads of grain represent 7 years of abundance throughout Egypt. The 7 lean cows and 7 scorched heads of grain represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. Genesis 41:32 emphasizes the certainty and urgency, but Joseph doesn't stop with interpretation. Something in this moment unlocks not just prophetic insight, but administrative genius. He continues, offering unsolicited advice to the most powerful man on earth. "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. Genesis 41:33-36 outlines a comprehensive plan to save a nation. The throne room falls silent. Courtiers exchange glances. Officials who have spent lifetimes climbing political ladders watch a prisoner from a dungeon speak with an authority that fills the space. And Pharaoh, whose word is law, whose judgments are final, looks at Joseph with recognition dawning in his eyes. He turns to his officials. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then, in a decision that takes perhaps seconds but changes the course of history, Pharaoh speaks directly to Joseph. Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Genesis 41:38-40 records this stunning pronouncement. What happens next unfolds like a dream, like those visions from youth finally manifesting in reality. Pharaoh takes his signet ring from his own finger and places it on Joseph's finger. He dresses him in robes of fine linen. He places a gold chain around his neck. He has him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shout, "Make way," before him. Genesis 41:42-43 captures this transformation that happens not over years, but in moments. Pharaoh declares, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt." He gives Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah, and gives him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. Joseph is 30 years old. 13 years from the pit to the palace. 13 years from betrayed son to royal administrator. 13 years of preparation invisible to everyone, including Joseph himself, but orchestrated with precision by a God who sees the end from the beginning. Joseph doesn't waste his elevation on celebration. He immediately begins traveling throughout Egypt, implementing the plan he outlined to Pharaoh. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produces bountifully. Joseph collects grain like sand of the sea, so much that he stops keeping records because the quantity is beyond measure. Genesis 41:49 captures this almost incomprehensible accumulation of resources against a future threat only Joseph and Pharaoh truly believe is coming. The years of plenty pass quickly, as prosperous years do. People grow comfortable. The harvests seem endless. Perhaps some begin to doubt Joseph's prediction of famine. Perhaps some resent the portion taken for storage when there seems to be more than enough for everyone. But Joseph remains fixed on the vision, building storage cities, organizing distribution systems, preparing for a catastrophe that will test everything he's built. Then the 7 years of abundance end, and the 7 years of famine begin, exactly as Joseph predicted. Genesis 41:54 tells us, the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. The vindication is complete but joyless, because Joseph knows what comes next. Desperation, death, entire populations on the move, seeking survival. The famine spreads beyond Egypt to surrounding nations. Canaan feels the drought, and in the tents of Jacob, now old and weathered by grief and years, the same brothers who sold Joseph into slavery face starvation. They hear rumors of grain in Egypt, of a wise administrator who somehow prepared for this catastrophe, of food available for those who can pay. Jacob sends 10 of his sons to Egypt, keeping only Benjamin, his youngest, the only remaining son of Rachel, home with him. The brothers arrive in Egypt and present themselves before the administrator who controls the grain distribution. They bow down before him with their faces to the ground, and Joseph recognizes them instantly, though 20 years have passed, though gray streaks their beards and lines mark their faces. Genesis 42:7 tells us, as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. The dreams have come true. The sheaves have bowed. The stars have descended. But Joseph feels no triumph, only a complex tangle of emotions he cannot immediately sort. He sees their desperation, their humiliation, their ignorance of who stands before them, and in that moment he makes a decision that will test them, reveal them, and ultimately redeem them. But that story belongs to another chapter of Joseph's extraordinary life. What matters now, in this moment of recognition, is understanding how the impossible happened, how a slave became Egypt's savior, how a prisoner became second only to Pharaoh, how a boy thrown into a pit ascended to a throne. The answer isn't found in Joseph's abilities, though they were considerable. It isn't found in luck or chance, though circumstances seem to conspire in his favor. It's found in a pattern that repeats throughout his story, a phrase that appears again and again like a refrain. The Lord was with Joseph, not preventing the suffering, not sparing him the injustice, not shielding him from the consequences of others' sins, but present, working, transforming every betrayal into preparation, every prison into training ground, every loss into eventual gain. The 13 years of descent weren't wasted. They were essential. The slavery taught Joseph Egyptian language, culture, and customs he would need to administer the nation. The management of Potiphar's household gave him experience in large-scale organization. The false accusation taught him that integrity matters regardless of outcome. The years in prison connected him with the cupbearer who would eventually remember him. And the waiting, the endless waiting, forged in him a patience and perspective that would sustain him through the pressures of power. When Joseph stood before Pharaoh, he wasn't an untested dreamer from Canaan. He was a man who had been stripped of everything except his character and his God. He was a man who had learned to prosper in slavery, to maintain dignity in prison, to trust when circumstances screamed betrayal. He was a man whose gifts had been refined in fires, hot enough to either purify or destroy. And when the moment came, when opportunity met preparation, when a king's need intersected with a prisoner's calling, 13 years of hidden work manifested in a single night of transformation. This is what this ancient account reveals about how divine purposes unfold in human lives. The preparation rarely looks like preparation. The training doesn't come in classrooms, but in pit and prison. The qualification isn't credentials, but character forged in crucibles. And the timing isn't ours to dictate. Joseph couldn't rush his promotion. He could only remain faithful in slavery, maintain integrity when falsely accused, serve excellently in prison, and wait for a God who sees beyond tomorrow into decades of unfolding purpose. The story reveals that betrayal doesn't disqualify you from destiny. Joseph's brothers meant to destroy him, but their act of selling him was the first step toward his becoming the one who would eventually save them and their families from starvation. Genesis 50:20 would later capture Joseph's understanding of this. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. The story reveals that false accusation doesn't derail divine plans. Potiphar's wife's lie put Joseph in prison, but that prison connected him to the cupbearer, whose memory would bring him to Pharaoh's attention at precisely the right moment. What looked like the end was actually a necessary chapter in the journey. Consider the precision of it. If Joseph had been executed immediately, as often happened with slaves who offended their masters' households, the story ends there. If Potiphar had believed his wife completely, Joseph dies. But something in Potiphar's response, throwing Joseph in prison rather than ordering his death, suggests he suspected the truth. Perhaps he knew his wife's character. Perhaps he'd seen Joseph's integrity for years and couldn't reconcile it with such a betrayal. Perhaps he was caught between believing his slave and protecting his marriage. So he chose a middle path. Remove Joseph from his household, but preserve his life. And that middle path, born from Potiphar's internal conflict, was exactly what divine providence needed. Because the king's prison wasn't just any dungeon, it was where political prisoners were kept, where Pharaoh's officials who had fallen from favor awaited their fate. It was the one place in all of Egypt where a Hebrew slave could end up, in the same cell block as the Pharaoh's cupbearer. Any other prison, any other location, and Joseph never makes that connection. He languishes in obscurity and dies unknown. But this prison, the one he reached through false accusation and partial mercy, was the exact intersection point between his past and his future. What looked like injustice was actually divine positioning, moving pieces on a board Joseph couldn't see, arranging circumstances with a precision that would only become clear years later. The story reveals that forgotten doesn't mean forsaken. 2 years passed between Joseph interpreting the cupbearer's dream and being summoned to Pharaoh. 2 years of thinking rescue was coming, then wondering if anyone remembered, then facing the possibility that prison was permanent. Imagine Joseph in those first days after the cupbearer's release, listening for footsteps that might be guards coming to announce his freedom. Surely it would be soon. The cupbearer had promised. The man had looked him in the eyes and sworn he would remember. Surely any day now, any hour, any moment, but days become weeks, weeks become months. The initial hope that burns bright begins to dim. 6 months pass, a year. Joseph stops jumping up every time he hears the prison gates open. He stops scanning every guard's face for news. He's learned this lesson before, in the pit, in Potiphar's house, and now here. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, and his heart has been sick so long he barely remembers what health feels like. 18 months pass, 20 months, 2 years. And in those 2 years, something shifts in Joseph, not to bitterness, but to something deeper than mere optimism. He moves beyond hoping for the cupbearer to remember and settles into a harder trust, that God hasn't forgotten even if everyone else has. This is a different kind of faith than the faith of his youth. The 17-year-old boy who had those dreams believed God would fulfill them. The 30-year-old man in prison believes God even when fulfillment seems impossible. One is the faith of innocence. The other is the faith forged in darkness and refined by waiting. But the delay wasn't divine forgetfulness. It was divine timing, ensuring Joseph stood before Pharaoh at exactly 30 years old, the age when Egyptian officials typically began major governmental service, the age that gave him enough maturity to bear the weight of what was coming. Had the cupbearer remembered immediately, Joseph would have been 28, possibly too young for Pharaoh to trust with national authority. The Egyptians had elaborate protocols about age and rank. 30 was the threshold of full adulthood in their system, the age when a man was considered seasoned enough for serious responsibility. Before that, he was still learning, still forming, still untested. So God waited. Not because he had forgotten, not because he was cruel, but because the Joseph who needed to stand before Pharaoh wasn't ready at 28. The additional 2 years of waiting, of wrestling with hope and disappointment, of learning to trust beyond feeling, of deepening into a faith that didn't require immediate answers. Those years completed something in Joseph's character that couldn't be rushed. He aged into readiness. When Pharaoh's summons finally came, Joseph was exactly the right age, with exactly the right experience, bearing exactly the right character for exactly the right moment. The timing that felt cruel was actually kind. The delay that felt like forgetfulness was actually meticulous remembrance. God was watching the calendar more carefully than Joseph ever imagined. The story reveals that the dreams God gives don't die just because circumstances try to kill them. 20 years separated Joseph's visions of his brothers bowing before him from the day it actually happened. 20 years of slavery and imprisonment that should have suffocated those dreams. but they survived because they weren't. Joseph's dreams projected onto God. They were God's plans revealed to Joseph, and nothing in hell or earth can permanently thwart what heaven has decreed. Think about the audacity required for Joseph to still believe those dreams after 2 decades of contradiction. A 17-year-old boy sees visions of glory. That same boy is then betrayed, enslaved, falsely accused, imprisoned and forgotten. Every single year that passes makes the dreams seem more ridiculous. At 20, enslaved, he might think, maybe in time. At 25, still a slave, the hope grows dimmer. At 28, in prison, it seems laughable. At 30, forgotten by everyone who might have helped, it appears utterly impossible. But the dreams don't die because they weren't born from Joseph's imagination. They were implanted by divine revelation. And there's a difference between a vision we conjure and a vision God gives. Our dreams can die because they're subject to our circumstances. We dream based on what seems possible, what seems likely, what seems achievable. But God's dreams exist independent of our circumstances because they're based on His character and His purposes, not on our situation. When God decrees something, He doesn't check with our circumstances first to see if they approve. He simply makes it so, moving whatever needs to move, waiting however long it takes, orchestrating whatever complexity is required. Joseph's dreams survived 20 years of opposition because they were backed by heaven's determination. The brothers could throw him in a pit, but they couldn't kill the vision. The Ishmaelites could sell him into slavery, but they couldn't cancel what God had ordained. Potiphar's wife could send him to prison, but she couldn't imprison the promise. The cupbearer could forget him, but divine memory never fails. Every attempt to kill the dream only repositioned it for eventual fulfillment. What Joseph's enemies meant to destroy, they actually helped establish. The very actions designed to prevent the dreams from coming true created the exact circumstances necessary for those dreams to be fulfilled. That's the perverse beauty of divine providence. It can use opposition as building material. It can transform obstacles into stepping stones. It can take what hell designs for destruction and repurpose it for deliverance. We all face pits, maybe not literally. Maybe. They're the betrayals that come from those who should protect us, the false accusations that destroy reputations we spent years building, the prisons of circumstance that seem to have no exit. The years that pass while we wait for promises that feel increasingly impossible. The moments when the dreams God gave us seem to mock us from a distance we can't cross. Your pit might be a career that collapsed after you did everything right. You played by the rules, worked with integrity, gave your best years, and still got pushed out. Now you watch people with less experience and less ethics occupy the position you earned. And you wonder if integrity is worth it. You wonder if playing by the rules is for suckers. You wonder if you should have compromised when you had the chance. Or maybe your pit is a relationship that imploded despite your faithfulness. You were loyal when they were difficult. You forgave when they failed. You invested when they withdrew. And still, they left. Or worse, they betrayed you publicly, rewriting history to make you the villain in a story where you were actually the one trying to save things. Now you carry the weight of a reputation you don't deserve, and every attempt to defend yourself makes you look worse. So you stop defending yourself and just carry it, wondering if truth even matters anymore. Maybe your pit is a ministry that died after you poured your life into it. You believed God called you to something. You prepared, sacrificed, gave everything you had, and it collapsed anyway. Now you're stuck with the theological confusion of reconciling God's call with God's apparent withdrawal of blessing. Did you hear wrong? Did you fail somehow? Was it ever real? And the questions haunt you more than the failure itself, because failure you can survive, but not knowing whether you can trust your sense of God's leading, that shakes the foundation of everything. Or perhaps your pit is the prison of chronic circumstances, health that won't improve, finances that won't stabilize, family dysfunction that won't resolve, depression that won't lift, addiction that won't break, doors that won't open no matter how hard you push. You've prayed the prayers, claimed the promises, done the work, sought the counseling, and nothing changes. Year after year of waking up to the same struggles, the same limitations, the same disappointments. And you're tired, not just physically tired, but soul tired. Tired of hoping, tired of fighting, tired of pretending you're fine when you're barely holding on. And in those moments, Joseph's story whispers something both challenging and comforting. Your pit might be preparation, your prison might be positioning, your waiting might be the hidden work that qualifies you for what's coming. Not because the suffering is good in itself, but because God specializes in bringing life from death, promotion from prison, fulfillment from failure. This isn't prosperity gospel nonsense that promises every hardship is just a setup for a comeback. Sometimes suffering is just suffering. Sometimes loss is just loss. Sometimes what dies stays dead. But in Joseph's case, and in many of our cases, the descent serves a purpose we can't see while we're descending. The pit strips away the arrogance of youth. The slavery teaches competence and character. The false accusation removes any illusion that virtue guarantees comfort. The prison years create depth that success could never forge. The waiting produces a faith that doesn't depend on speed. And when the elevation finally comes, the person who rises is fundamentally different from the person who descended. Joseph, at 17, elevated to leadership, would have been insufferable and ineffective. All gifting, no character. All vision, no wisdom. All promise, no proof. But Joseph, at 30, pulled from prison to palace, is ready. Ready not just with the supernatural ability to interpret dreams, but with the natural wisdom that comes from suffering well. Ready not just to hold power, but to handle it properly. Ready not just to succeed, but to succeed without it destroying him. The question isn't whether you'll face the descent. Joseph's story makes clear that significant elevation usually requires significant descent first. The question is what you do in the darkness. Do you maintain integrity when no one's watching? Do you serve excellently even in slavery? Do you trust the God who gave the dreams even when the dreams seem dead? Do you keep your heart free from bitterness when you have every right to rage? Because here's what the story reveals that we often miss. Joseph's promotion wasn't reward for his suffering. It was the natural result of his formation. Pharaoh didn't elevate Joseph because he felt sorry for him. He elevated him because Joseph was qualified, not just supernaturally gifted, but naturally competent and demonstrably trustworthy. The years in Potiphar's house had trained him in administration and Egyptian protocol. The years in prison had connected him with political players and taught him about the criminal justice system. The years of waiting had matured him beyond his years. When opportunity came, he was ready, not lucky, ready. That's what the darkness does when we navigate it well. It doesn't just test us, it trains us. Every day of maintaining integrity when no one was watching was a day of building the character that could handle watching from everyone. Every season of serving excellently without recognition was practice for serving under intense scrutiny. Every moment of trusting God in the silence was strengthening the faith that would have to carry national responsibility. Joseph wasn't just surviving those years, he was, unknowingly, preparing for Pharaoh's palace by properly handling Potiphar's house and the prison keeper's trust. And that's the challenging part. It means our response in the pit matters. Our attitude in prison counts. What we do with the years of waiting isn't just killing time, it's forming character. We can become bitter or better. We can maintain integrity or abandon it since no one's watching anyway. We can serve with excellence or phone it in since we're undervalued. We can keep our hearts soft or let them calcify. We can trust in the dark or only when things are bright. And those choices, made in obscurity, determine whether we're ready when opportunity arrives. Joseph did. And when Pharaoh's summons came, he was ready. Not just ready with the ability to interpret dreams, but ready with the character to handle power without corruption, authority without arrogance, elevation without forgetting where he came from. The years of descent had prepared him not just for the position, but for the person he needed to be in that position. Notice that when they pulled Joseph from prison to stand before Pharaoh, he shaved and changed his clothes. This small detail matters. He'd been in prison for years, probably looking the part, unkempt, unwashed, wearing prisoner's garments. But he doesn't stand before Pharaoh looking like a victim. He presents himself with dignity. Even after years of degradation, he knows how to compose himself. He understands protocol. He respects the moment. This is what his years in Potiphar's house taught him: how to carry himself in Egyptian high society, how to show proper respect to authority, how to navigate cultural expectations. And when Pharaoh explains his dreams, Joseph doesn't grandstand. He doesn't say, "Well, it's about time someone recognized my gifts." He doesn't use the moment to air grievances or demand apologies. He simply interprets what God shows him and offers practical wisdom for managing what's coming. No bitterness, no victim mentality, no manipulation, just clear communication and sound counsel. This is a man who has processed his pain rather than being controlled by it. He's free internally, even though he's been in chains externally. Then watch how he handles the promotion. Pharaoh offers him the second highest position in Egypt, and Joseph accepts it without either false humility or arrogant presumption. He doesn't say, "Oh, I couldn't possibly," like someone fishing for more compliments. He doesn't say, "Finally someone recognizes my worth," like someone with something to prove. He simply steps into the role with the same competence he brought to Potiphar's house and the prison. New position, same character, massive elevation, no corruption. This is what the years of descent created. A man who could handle blessing without it ruining him. And when famine comes and his brothers appear, bowing before him just like the childhood dreams foretold, Joseph doesn't gloat. He could have. After everything they did to him, he would have been justified in at least reminding them how wrong they were, how right he was, how the dreams they mocked came true despite their attempts to kill them. But he doesn't lead with vindication. He leads with testing, not to torture them, but to see if they've changed, to determine if they're safe to reconcile with. And when he sees evidence of their transformation, he weeps. Not tears of triumph, but tears of grief for the years lost and joy for the restoration possible. This is a man whose heart remained tender through decades that should have hardened it. The pit and prison didn't embitter him, they deepened him. What is your pit today? What prison holds you? What broken promise haunts you? What dream seems dead? What betrayal wounds you? What false accusation defines you? What years of waiting weary you? Is it the job you were promised that went to someone else? Is it the relationship that ended after you gave everything to save it? Is it the ministry that collapsed under the weight of criticism and misunderstanding? Is it the health diagnosis that changed every plan you made? Is it the financial crisis that wiped out what you spent years building? Is it the family fracture that you can't fix, no matter how hard you try? Is it the reputation destroyed by lies you can't effectively refute? Is it the calling you're sure God gave you, but circumstances have made impossible? Is it the years that keep passing while you wait for breakthrough that doesn't come? Maybe it's the job itself, not just losing it, but watching someone less qualified, less dedicated, less invested get the position that had your name on it. You trained them, you mentored them, you covered their mistakes, and when the promotion came, they got the office while you got a thank you email. Or maybe it's the relationship where you were the only one fighting. You went to counseling alone, you prayed alone, you changed and compromised and bent until you didn't recognize yourself anymore, and still they walked away as if your years together meant nothing. Maybe it's the ministry you poured your life into, where you served with pure motives and genuine love, only to watch it crumble because people preferred gossip to truth, division to unity, comfort to calling. You gave them your best, and they gave you betrayal. Maybe it's the diagnosis that came with no warning. One day you're making 5-year plans. The next day, you're trying to figure out if you have 5 years. The disease that doesn't care about your dreams, your responsibilities, your unfinished business. Or the financial collapse that wasn't even your fault. The economy shifted, the company downsized, the investment failed, the emergency depleted everything, and now you're starting over at an age when you thought you'd be established. Maybe it's the family member who won't speak to you over a misunderstanding they refuse to hear your side of. And every holiday becomes a reminder of the reconciliation that won't happen, or the reputation destroyed by someone's lie that spread faster than your truth could travel. And now your name carries suspicion you can't shake, no matter how you defend yourself. Maybe it's the calling that still burns in your chest, even though every door has slammed shut. You know what God told you. You remember the confirmation, the peace, the clarity. But years have passed and nothing has opened up, and you're starting to wonder if you heard wrong, or if God changed his mind, or if you somehow disqualified yourself without knowing how. Maybe it's the prayers you've prayed so long that the words feel hollow now. The breakthrough you've believed for until belief itself became exhausting. The promise you've stood on until your legs are tired from standing. Maybe it's the ache of being 30 years old and feeling like life has passed you by while you've been stuck. Or 40 and realizing you're not where you thought you'd be. Or 50 and wondering if it's too late for the dreams to die. Or 60 and trying to make peace with disappointment. Or 20 and terrified that the betrayals you've already experienced mean you'll never trust again. 30 and watching your friends get married, buy houses, advance in careers, start families, while you're still trying to recover from the setback that derailed you. 40 and doing the math on how long it would take to rebuild, wondering if you have enough years left to recover what was lost. 50 and feeling the weight of decades that can't be reclaimed, opportunities that won't circle back around, the narrowing window of possibility. 60 and wrestling with whether acceptance is wisdom or surrender, whether making peace with less than you dreamed is maturity or defeat. 20 and already so wounded that you can't imagine being vulnerable again, can't picture trusting again, can't see how anyone could love the damaged version of yourself that betrayal has left behind. Whatever your age, whatever your pit, whatever your prison, Joseph's story speaks. It speaks into the specific ache of your particular disappointment. It speaks to the exact contours of your unique pain. It says that your current location isn't your final destination. It says that the people who betrayed you don't get the final word on your story. It says that false accusations may define your present, but they don't determine your future. It says that the years you feel you've wasted God might be using to prepare you. It says that dreams delayed aren't necessarily dreams denied. It says that forgotten by people doesn't mean forsaken by God. It says that what your enemies meant for evil, God can repurpose for good without excusing their evil or trivializing your pain. Joseph's story says that the brothers who throw you in the pit don't write the final chapter. It says that the Potiphar's wife who lies about you doesn't define your legacy. It says that the cupbearer who forgets you doesn't determine your value. It says that 13 years of suffering can be preparation for decades of purpose. It says that God can be working when you can't see evidence of his work. It says that your faithfulness in darkness matters even when no one witnesses it but him. It says that the dreams you have at 17 might not make sense until you're 30, and that the delay doesn't mean the death of what was promised. But it also says this: how you handle the descent matters. Your character in the pit affects your capacity for the palace. Your integrity in obscurity prepares you for visibility. Your faithfulness when no one notices qualifies you for when everyone's watching. The Joseph who interprets Pharaoh's dream was formed in the years before anyone knew his name. The second in command of Egypt was shaped in a pit and forged in a prison. The man who saved nations from famine was trained by years of lacking rescue. What looked like wasted time was actually invested time, building equity and character that would be required for the coming responsibility. Joseph didn't know that refusing Potiphar's wife would prepare him to resist the corruption that comes with power. He didn't know that managing Potiphar's household was training for managing Egypt's resources. He didn't know that interpreting dreams in prison was practice for interpreting dreams for Pharaoh. He didn't know that years of waiting were developing the patience required to execute a 14-year agricultural plan. He couldn't see that every injustice he endured with integrity was forging the character necessary to handle authority without abusing it. He had no way of knowing that the pit was preparing him for the palace, that the prison was positioning him for promotion, that the betrayal was building him for blessing. And you don't know either. You don't know what God is developing in you through what you're enduring. You can't see how the waiting is building patience, how the injustice is refining integrity, how the obscurity is developing humility, how the betrayal is teaching you to depend on God alone. You can't perceive that your capacity for future responsibility is being expanded by present difficulty. You have no way of knowing that the very things breaking your heart might be making you into the person capable of handling what God has planned next. So whatever pit holds you today, ask yourself, what kind of person am I becoming here? Am I maintaining integrity or justifying compromise because no one's watching? Am I serving with excellence or just doing enough to get by? Am I keeping my heart soft or letting bitterness take root? Am I trusting God in the darkness or only when there's light? Am I processing my pain or letting it poison me? Am I preparing for promotion even though it seems impossible? Because how you answer these questions might matter more than how quickly you escape. These aren't easy questions. They're not meant to add guilt to your suffering or suggest that your pain is your fault. They're meant to remind you that you still have agency in the pit. You can't control what was done to you, but you can control who you become through it. You can't determine how long you'll be here, but you can decide how you'll be here. You can't change the circumstances, but you can steward your character in the circumstances. And that stewardship, that faithfulness in the dark, is never wasted, never unseen by God, never irrelevant to your future. Joseph could have become bitter in the pit. He could have grown cynical in prison. He could have lost his faith during the years of waiting. He could have let betrayal make him cruel, injustice make him calloused, disappointment make him distrustful. No one would have blamed him. His suffering was real, undeserved, prolonged. But he chose differently, and that choice, to maintain character when it would have been easier to abandon it, prepared him for promotion that would have destroyed him if it had come earlier. The palace would have ruined the 17-year-old version of Joseph, but the 30-year-old who had been refined by suffering. He was ready, not just for the position, but for the person he needed to be in that position. Share in the comments. This community understands that the journey from pit to palace is neither quick nor easy, but it is possible when the Lord is with you. Share your pit, name your prison, speak your broken promise, your dead dream, your wounding betrayal, your false accusation, your weary waiting. You're not alone in the darkness. Others here understand the peculiar suffering of delayed dreams and derailed plans. Others here know what it's like to trust God in the absence of evidence. Others here carry wounds from people who should have protected them, accusations from people who should have believed them, and years of waiting for breakthrough that hasn't come yet. There's power in naming it. There's healing in speaking it out loud, even if only in a comment that strangers will read. There's something that breaks when you stop pretending you're fine and admit where it actually hurts. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need to have faith that feels strong or trust that comes easy. You just need to be honest about where you are. The pit is real. The prison is real. The pain is real. And so is the presence of God in all of it, even when you can't feel Him, even when you can't see Him, even when you wonder if He's forgotten you. And maybe in sharing, we remind each other that the story isn't over, that the pit is a chapter, not the conclusion, that prison can be positioning, that waiting can be formation, that what feels like the end might actually be the transition to what God intended all along. Maybe we remind each other that character matters more than comfort, that integrity is worth maintaining even when it costs everything, that faithfulness in obscurity prepares us for responsibility and visibility, and that the dreams God gives survive even when circumstances try to kill them. Maybe we become for each other what Joseph didn't have in the pit, voices reminding us that we're not forgotten, that our suffering isn't meaningless, that God is still sovereign even when life feels out of control. Maybe we speak to each other what Joseph couldn't hear in prison, that the waiting serves a purpose, that the delay has meaning, that the years aren't wasted just because they're hard. Maybe we offer each other the perspective that only comes from hindsight, the assurance that Joseph couldn't have until his brothers bowed before him, and he finally understood that nothing had been random, nothing had been wasted, nothing had been outside of God's redemptive plan. We can be that for each other, not with empty promises or toxic positivity, not by minimizing pain or rushing grief, but by bearing witness to each other's suffering and speaking truth into each other's darkness, by saying, I see you, your pain is real, your waiting is hard, and you're not alone in it. God is with you. Your story isn't finished. Hold on. If this story revealed something you needed to see, subscribe and activate the bell. Every week, another story of impossible transformation. Another account of divine faithfulness, another reminder that your current chapter is not your final chapter. Every week, we pull back the surface of familiar Bible stories to find the depth underneath, the struggle, the doubt, the waiting, the testing, the formation, and ultimately the fulfillment that comes not because we deserve it, but because God is faithful to what He starts. These aren't just ancient stories. They're mirrors showing us our own journey, maps for our own wilderness, promises for our own waiting. Every week, we'll find ourselves in these narratives, see our pain in their suffering, recognize our questions in their doubts, discover our hope in their outcomes. Because the God who was with Joseph in the pit is with you in yours. The God who didn't forget Joseph in prison hasn't forgotten you in your waiting. The God who elevated Joseph from prisoner to prince can elevate you from whatever pit holds you to whatever purpose He's prepared for you. Next week, a man stands at a river, watching the nation he's supposed to lead cross into their destiny while he remains behind. Moses on the banks of the Jordan, within sight of everything he worked 40 years to reach, but forbidden to enter because of one moment of anger, one instance when his patience broke, one time when the pressure overwhelmed the propriety. The tragedy of Moses, how one moment of anger cost him everything he'd worked toward. But also, the deeper story underneath that tragedy, the mercy that let him see it from the mountain, the grace that included him in the transfiguration centuries later, the redemption that meant his exclusion from Canaan wasn't his exclusion from God's presence, the warning and the mercy in the story no one talks about, the terrible cost of unprocessed anger and the surprising kindness of God even in discipline. Don't miss it. Because if Joseph's story is about surviving what others do to you, Moses' story is about surviving what you do to yourself. The self-sabotage that costs us the very things we've worked hardest to achieve, and whether there's hope after we've disqualified ourselves from our own destinies. It's about the moment when your pain erupts into action you can't take back, when your weariness manifests as words you can't unsay, when your frustration costs you the very thing you've sacrificed everything to reach. And it's about what happens after. That moment, whether God's plan for you can survive your failure, whether there's purpose after disqualification, whether mercy exists on the other side of consequence.